Shalom Aleichem, my dear brothers and sisters. I was asked a question whether Jews are missionaries or whether they ever were missionaries. So the answer to this question is going to be a little bit complex, so I'm going to try to be as clear as possible. So first I would have to take you a little bit through world history as it is in the eyes of the Torah. So initially God has created the world, and He created the first human being named Adam, peace be upon him. And God told him to serve God and to worship Him. And the way Adam was supposed to do it is through following 6 commandments. And which he did. Adam and his wife and his children followed the 6 commandments which God has given them. However, after about 10 generations, the humanity, meaning the descendants of Adam, became corrupt, and they started worshipping idols, and they started to violate these 6 commandments. At this point, God has decided to start from scratch. He decided to wipe out humanity and choose one man who was still righteous in that generation, which was Noah, peace be upon him, and continue the humanity from Noah, through Noah. And that's what God did. He wiped out the humanity, and God has chosen Noah, and God has sealed a covenant with Noah, that Noah and his descendants are to follow 7 commandments, meaning God has added one more commandment to the commandments of Adam. So instead of 6, now Noah had to follow 7 commandments, Noah and his descendants. And I'm not going to talk about the 7 commandments right now because I have another video where I do talk about it. So anyway, so now humanity from Noah and on had to follow 7 commandments. And again, after about 10 generations, the humanity became corrupt and they started to violate these 7 commandments. However, this time was a little bit different, because this time a person named Abraham, peace be upon him, came into the scene. And Abraham was unique because he was the first person that logically was able to figure out that there is one invisible God. And the Midrash actually tells us how he came to that conclusion. And another uniqueness about Abraham was that he was able to influence people. In fact, God says in the Torah that the reason He chose Abraham was because God knows that whatever Abraham teaches to his children is going to stand forever. And when Abraham began to worship this God who he has now recognized, God started to communicate with Abraham. This is how Abraham became a prophet. God started to speak to Abraham, and God has taken him through 10 trials, and Abraham passed all these 10 trials. And God has sealed a covenant with Abraham, and He said that I'm going to choose your descendants, and the whole world will be blessed through you and through your descendants. And God has promised him how it's going to happen, that the covenant that's going to be sealed with the descendants is going to be after 400 years. And this is exactly what happened. After Abraham, he had a son named Isaac, peace be upon him. Isaac had a son named Jacob, peace be upon him. And Jacob had the 12 sons, peace be upon them. And they were the originators of the Israelite nation. And these 12 sons, eventually with their children and their family, were forced to go to Egypt. And in Egypt they were enslaved, and through a bunch of miracles, God has taken the Israelites out of Egypt and has brought them to the Sinai desert. And at the Sinai desert, by the mountain of Sinai, God has sealed a covenant with them. And God told them that you will be a precious nation for me, but you have to do certain things. And what certain things they had to do? They had to observe the 613 commandments now. And this way, they were supposed to be a light unto the nations, as the prophet Isaiah calls us. Or as the Torah calls the Israelites, that they were supposed to be a nation of in Hebrew it's called Mamlechet Kohanim, the nation of priests. meaning they were supposed to be the teachers of the world. Now, how were they supposed to teach the world? Not through preaching, by the way, because the Torah there's no commandment in the Torah where Jews are to preach. The Torah simply says that Jews are supposed to observe the 613 commandments, and by observing these commandments, the world will learn about God. And one of the commandments, for example, is a good example, is the Sabbath. The Jews are supposed to observe the seventh day, and with this, prove to the world that God has created the world within 6 days and didn't create anything new on the seventh day, as a testimony. So this was the purpose of the Israelite nation, to spread light into the world, meaning spread godliness into the world, so that the world will return to observing the 7 commandments which God has given to Noah. And they were supposed to be like the teachers. So, therefore, to answer the question, Jews do not missionize the non-Jews to become Jews. This is not the purpose of the world. However, Jews do missionize the non-Jews to observe the 7 commandments. And I'll give you an example. The example is, for example, you have a professor, let's say, in college. He teaches economics. And he has a bunch of students, and he teaches them economics. The purpose of the professor is not to turn everybody into professors so that they would teach others. That's not the purpose. The purpose of the professor is to teach them so that they know economics. Now, some students can become professors if they want to, but this is not really the whole purpose of him teaching them. Same thing with the Jews. The Jews are supposed to teach the world what God is, and the idea of the 7 laws, the 7 commandments. But the Jews are not supposed to be teaching the world or urging them to become Jews also. That's not really the purpose. So, and it's interesting that in Prophet Isaiah chapter 42, it talks about the servant of God who doesn't bring light or teach the world by preaching or by making his voice heard. Not through that, but by simply observing justice, meaning observing God's laws. This is what teaches. This is what influences the world the most, by doing the righteous things, observing God's laws. And it's interesting that if you look through the history of humanity, that monotheistic Abrahamic religions began in places where Jews lived. We have the Christianity began where Jews lived. We have the Islam began where Jews lived. And now, Jews didn't do a perfect job. Don't get me wrong. Jews could have done better. If Jews did the perfect job, then the whole world today would recognize God, and they would be following the 7 laws specifically, and they would identify themselves as the Bnei Noach, the followers of the covenant of Noach that God sealed with Noach. And there would be no arguments between the monotheistic religions. There would be no wars between these religions. Right now, unfortunately, we see wars within the monotheistic religions, and that's really as a result that Jews didn't do the job perfectly as they were supposed to do. But God willing, someday this will change, and someday the whole world will recognize the one and only invisible and indivisible God, non-physical, and the whole world will observe the 7 laws which God commanded to Noah, peace be upon him. And I hope this answers your question, and if you have any more questions, please feel free to comment. Thank you.